Earlier, we analyzed the de facto guilty verdict of candidate Lee Jae Young and the future legal directions. Now, let's dive into the upcoming presidential election landscape and its potential impacts. Here's reporter Kang Young-ho, our Democratic Party expert. Reporter Kang, it seems the Democratic Party didn't anticipate this. What moves have they made?
After the Supreme Court ruling, acting party leader Park Chan-dae and other Dem leaders held an emergency meeting. They quickly held an emergency assembly, reflecting the Democratic Party's busy response. The Democratic Party expressed strong regret, calling it a political ruling, asserting that it interfered with politics.
A building that looks like a shoddy job made out of styrofoam. The Supreme Court has thrown its own credibility and honor into the gutter, even worse than a house of cards.
Amid such criticism, the pro-Myung faction has also voiced demands for judicial reform, including restructuring the appointment system for judges and promoting diversity in composition as part of the new government's agenda.
While they claim it's a political ruling, shouldn't the Democratic Party strategize with a month left until elections?
As seen in the earlier report, the Democratic Party plans to complete the presidential race under the Lee Jae Young system without wavering. A senior Democratic Party member predicted to MBN that the trial wouldn't conclude before the election. It generally takes a considerable period for the Supreme Court to pass the case back to the High Court, followed by the start of a new trial.
Candidate Lee Jae Young's intentions are important and of interest, and earlier he emphasized the people's will in the report. So does that mean he's going to keep going?
After hearing the Supreme Court's decision, candidate Lee stated that ultimately, what matters most is the will of the people. Having secured the Democratic nomination with a record-breaking vote count and leading by a wide margin in various polls, it seems they're subtly indicating there's no intention to step down. Plus, they probably figured the final verdict wouldn't come before the election. In fact, even after today's verdict, the candidate went ahead with all scheduled events. He firmly declared that he would steadfastly continue with his scheduled appearances this week.
Within the Democratic Party, there has been much criticism regarding Lee Jae Young's judicial risks. Although today was unexpected, now that a conclusion has been reached, isn't there talk about replacing the candidate?
I investigated the internal atmosphere of the Democratic Party from various angles. Regarding the possibility of replacing the candidate, the explanation I received is that it is physically impossible, regardless of political advantages or disadvantages. The process must be completed before the candidate registration deadline on the 11th, but the schedule is too tight. A member of Lee Jae Young's election committee also dismissed any scenarios of candidate replacement within the Democratic Party.
But just in case, if there's a situation where candidate Lee Jae Young can't run or decides to step down, with the primaries over, can the second or third place candidates take over the candidacy?
Yeah, I looked into it, but it seems unlikely. The Democratic Party's rules and regulations don't have provisions for transferring candidacy to the next ranking candidate, and the primary election process is already over. Additionally, since only the ruling was overturned today, and Lee hasn't lost his eligibility to run, it is impossible for the Democratic Party to start a new selection process right now. However, it is possible for an independent progressive candidate to emerge. Yet, given Lee Jae Young's overwhelming support when he was selected, accepting a new candidate appears virtually impossible, as it would undoubtedly encounter fierce opposition from party members, making it highly improbable.
He won with overwhelming support, but the verdict just came out today. Then, we should also look at future public opinion polls. Could this also affect the polls?
Unlike the acquittal in the appeals court, the Supreme Court has now ruled with a guilty stance, which will undoubtedly impact Lee's approval ratings. Even within the Democratic Party, it was believed that this ruling would speed up the consolidation of support from both sides. A member of Lee Jae Young's campaign team emphasized he might be running for president with a guilty label, but it's not enough to shake up the election landscape. Since this election law trial is ultimately about verbal remarks, the impact on morality is relatively less. Furthermore, the candidate's judicial risks are already largely reflected in the approval ratings.
It's already been reflected. Lastly, if candidate Lee Jae Young gets elected and becomes president, we've analyzed the legal aspects before, but what does the Democratic Party say about Article 84 of the Constitution regarding immunity?
In fact, even within the Democratic Party, there was mention of preparing for the situation after the candidate's election. The president stated that if there's any attempt to undermine Article 84 of the Constitution, which protects the president from criminal prosecution while in office, they will take constitutional or legislative steps to prevent it. Furthermore, considering the multitude of ongoing lower court cases, there's growing speculation that should this candidate emerge victorious, the Supreme Court might intervene to put a stop to the trials.
And that's a wrap on how politics might be influencing things. That was reporter Kang Young Ho. Thank you.